Thank you so much. You can pick whatever you'd like, your choice.
Okay, perfect.
All right, next ticket. 288794. 8794. Last four numbers. Yay! Have a winner. Okay.
Your choice.
All right. And now we have a ticket number 8832. 8832. All right. We have a winner. 8832.
Made my day, young lady.
All right. 8840. 8840. Those to Terry. All right, Miners Bank. There might be some money in there. You never know. All right, we have 8800. 8800. Last four digits, 8800. Anybody? 8800. Terry says next. Moving right along. 8836. Congrats. Yay. 8828. 8828. Going once. 8828. Okay. 8799. 8799. 99. Going once. 8799. There we are. All right, Greg. Fantastic. And the Watkins pictures have a description on the back. 8782. 8782. 8782. Nope. 8782. 8782. 8798. Yay. All right. Thanks, Cheryl. 8790. 8790. 8790.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's nice to get a flavor from all of our guests while you're here. Okay, next I'm going to invite Veronica. Where did she go? There she is. Come on up. So just to give you an idea of what's in store for the rest of the afternoon, Veronica is going to give a talk about the history of the cemeteries. Two up on the hill, one for the Spanish, but anyone who would like to actually walk through the cemetery is welcome to do that. And Mike will be our docent for that. Veronica.
How's that? Okay. So before I begin, I'd like to make two apologies, actually three. First, by choice, I don't usually volunteer to speak in front of audiences, so I hope you'll excuse my nervousness. Second, I have fact-checked myself, but I shall make a mistake or two, probably, for those who know better, and you know who you are, Mike Cox and Mike Bolin. I hope you will forgive me. Oh, and also the park interpreters, I realize are out here too. Great. And finally, my apologies to our Spanish-speaking audience. Please forgive my atrocious pronunciation of Spanish surnames. I have only junior high Spanish classes to guide me, which, as you can tell from looking at me, was many years ago, early 70s. And I studied Spanish at school because my grandpa's generation was the last to learn Spanish at home. So, let's talk cemeteries. What is a cemetery? The first cemetery created specifically to hold the remains of Quicksilver miners and their family is in the Hacienda Cemetery located behind us on Bertram Road. We know this from photos taken of the cemetery by Carlton Watkins in 1850. At its present location. The Hacienda Cemetery has been the present location since that time. Down the road from the reduction work situated at the base of Mine Hill, where the outdoor museum is now located, with graves surrounded by picket fences, which we call cribs, designed to keep animals out from disinterring the dead. From the start, when the operations began, miners died in some gruesome ways, from getting blown to bits by dynamite, crushed by boulders, or buried in a cave-in, not to mention death from infectious diseases and murder. The Cornishmen could always be counted to die in mine accidents involving dynamite versus large amounts of rock. Starting in the 1860s, the Quicksilver Mine Company began bringing experienced English workers from Cornwall tin mines, where they were experts in blasting rock to reveal the ore. One such Cornishman was Richard Wedlake Jr., the great-great-grandfather of our NAQCPA board member, Richard Williams. So I'd like to stand up. That's Richard Williams. He also has a Spanish Town mining family, too. Richard Wedlake and his son and daughter-in-law arrived in New Almaden only about a year before his death, coming from Wales, where they had been mining ironstone. Wedlake's obituary in the San Jose Mercury for October 4th, 1883, reported that Coroner Harris was called to Almaden yesterday afternoon to hold an inquest over the remains of a miner who was killed about 1 o'clock and returned at a late hour last night. The facts are as follows. Richard Wedlake and his working partner, together with 2 Mexicans, were engaged in blasting shortly before noon in the Santa Isabel shaft, which has a length of 50 feet and a width of 10 feet, 4 blasts having been prepared and touched, one of which, however, did not explode. The men went to dinner at noon and returned about 1 o'clock. Wedlake commenced to investigate the cause of the failure of the blast to explode. The coroner's report noted Wedlake did not follow proper procedures. In practical terms, this meant that unless the dead man saved his money and paid into a burial society, his family would be hard-pressed to pay for the funeral. Wedlake was enrolled in a plan provided by the Quicksilver Company, and today he lies with 3 other Cornish miners in a plot at Oak Hill, which records still listed as owned by the New Almaden Mining Company. Now this is where we're going to veer off from the cause of the death for a moment to talk about exactly where the dead were sent to their final rest. The nearest cemetery to the mine in San Jose was Oak Hill, established on land donated by Antonio Chipoya to bury victims of the 1847 cholera epidemic in San Jose. In the days when wagons pulled by 4 or more horses were the only Uber to the cemetery, it was costly and difficult to bury your dead in a city cemetery. In a letter sent in 1952 to the Pioneer Society of Santa Clara County, a wife and daughter of Cornish miners describes daily rituals in the mining camp, in particular how they handled death. Then they traveled to the San Jose Hotel, staying overnight. The following morning, a plot was purchased and a funeral service performed at Oak Hill. Then the long and rough trip by wagon back to Mine Hill. The men worked 6 days a week, and they were paid by tonnage mined, not by hourly wages. All in all, working members of the funeral party lost 2 days of work, unless one of the days was Sunday, which could add up to quite a lot if a family had many working sons and son-in-laws that went to the funeral. If you add up lost wages, the hotel stay, and food for at least several people, a coffin, a cemetery plot, and a granite marker, a death in the family was a pretty pricey event. Now, when my 4th great-grandfather, Francisco Avila, died in a tram accident a few months before Richard Wedlake, he was not buried at Oak Hill. His death, as reported in the Mariposa Gazette, had a headline that read, "A fatal ride crushed to death. 2 miners at the New Almaden Quicksilver mine are killed." The shocking accident occurred at the New Almaden mine on Friday afternoon about 4 o'clock. Between the top of the hill to the works below are 3 inclines, over each of which cars are moved by means of a cable that passes around a drum, the weight of a loaded car as it descends, carrying the empty car up the incline. The design of the car is to carry ore exclusively, with employees being forbidden to ride upon them. Shortly before the accident, however, Foreman William Brown called to Francisco Avila and Thomas Cornish to join him in the ascending empty car on the middle incline. Brown, who was charged with maintaining the chain and cable apparatus, was rejoicing over the successful repair of a chain which had broken. Shortly after the 3 climbed into the car, a link in the chain connecting the cable to the car broke, and before the brake could be applied, the car sped violently down the incline, flew through the air, and capsized. Cornish, more fortunate than the others, was riding on the outer edge of the car and succeeded in jumping off without being hurt, but Brown and Avila were thrown under the car with fatal results. Brown's skull was frightfully crushed and he died instantly. Avila's side was crushed and he was otherwise bruised, but he lived for a few minutes and was able to converse a little. Avila was a native Californian, 41 years of age, with a wife and 7 children. An inquest verdict of the jury being in accordance with the facts, surprise, attached no blame to anyone connected with the mining company. The Mexican miners, for the most part, did not bury their dead at Oak Hill in the 19th century. Instead, they had 2 burial societies one could pay into, meaning that if they died, the society held money in their names and covered funeral costs and perhaps assisted the families. One of the societies was in charge of Guadalupe Cemetery, situated near the Catholic Church in Spanish Town. No official records were ever kept of the souls buried there, and the last wooden grave marker disappeared from those grounds at some point in the 1950s. This is where Francisco Avila, a paying member of the Society Nuestra Senora Guadalupe, lies in a now unmarked grave. As the mining operations began shrinking in the 1900s and families moved out of Spanish Town, the cemetery was abandoned and often vandalized. Some interred there were moved to other cemeteries. Like my great-grandmother, who was buried in the Guadalupe Cemetery in 1911, she was later moved in 1934 when her 3 unmarried daughters had saved enough money from their jobs at the canneries to purchase a large family plot in Cavalry Catholic Cemetery on the east side of San Jose. The other cemetery on the hill is the Hidalgo Cemetery, which is marked by a stand of cedars not far from the Guadalupe Cemetery. Again, no records were kept, and not much is known about the Hidalgo Cemetery, except that we were told by our dear late President Kenny Monahan that her uncle, Thomas Monahan, was a San Jose undertaker, and Kitty said that members of the Hidalgo Society paid Monahan to remove the last of the remains from that cemetery in the early 1920s for burial elsewhere. So what we know of burials at mine cemeteries, when one was listed as a final resting. So what we know of the burials of a mine cemetery, it comes from the being listed in an obit, undertaker's records, or family recollections. The Hacienda Cemetery on Bertram Road is located on the street running on the other side of the Los Alamitos Creek as it winds its way past Casa Grande, another cemetery with no official records kept. It was established by the Baron Forbes Company in the early 1850s to accommodate residents of the new village of Hacienda, as Almaden Road and its environs were called at that time. It was non-sectarian, and so it is there you will find both Catholics and Protestants buried together. Though many of the markers in the Hacienda Cemetery were stolen or destroyed by the elements, more than 50 graves enclosed by cribs made from white picket fencing still remain. Many of those at Hacienda were children from mining families living along Almaden Road, like Roberto Berriesa, a 10-year-old descendant of the original grantee to the land covered by the mine. This land was first occupied by Native Americans and then claimed by the Mexican governor of California and awarded in 1842 to Jose Berryessa. The Berryessas lost the land and some of their lives to American squatters with forged documents who went on to establish the New Almaden Mining Company. After the family was chased from their home, the Berryessas lived in various miners' cabins along Almaden Road. When Roberto, my great-grandmother's cousin, passed, he was placed in the Hacienda Cemetery a short walk from the house he grew up in. There's still a marker in the Guadalupe Cemetery for Daniel Aceves, a child who died not long after his first birthday. Daniel's father, Teodoro Aceves, was a native of New Almaden and worked as a blacksmith for the mine. One of his brothers was a furnace man and another was a Spanish town barber. The Aceves family had immigrated from Guanajuato, Mexico to California in 1860. Teodoro, besides being Daniel's father, was also a great-grandfather of former San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo on his mother's side. Of course, not all deaths occurred in mine accidents or through diseases and birth complications. Almaden back in the day was notorious for its frequent murders, as vividly depicted in the local newspapers and picked up with great interest by other papers across the United States. Another inhabitant of the Hacienda Cemetery is Joaquin Iturriaga, a native of Chile who was shot in a Spanish town bar fight in 1890 over a late repayment of a $1 loan. Joaquin, his shooter said at trial, was tall and menacing. He was known to have spent time in the insane asylum and was also known to be a stabber. So when Iturriaga shoved the short borrower up against the saloon wall, demanding the return of his $1, the little man, in righteous fear for his life, pulled out a pistol and shot Iturriaga, who died a few weeks later. The shooter got 5 years at San Quentin, and Iturriaga lays next to his wife, Lucia, whose wooden grave marker still stands close to the creek. Of course, infectious diseases were always a frequent taker of the living in the 19th century, especially children like Daniel and Roberto. On the eastern side of the road running through the Hacienda Cemetery is a grave site with one wood marker, listing in the names of the Castillo family who are buried there. Nicholas Castillo and Sulema Cecina were the parents of 9 children. The first child they lost was 1-year-old Beatrice in 1899. She died of cholera, which is caused from drinking water contaminated with sewage, resulting in severe dehydration from vomiting and diarrhea. Children under the age of 5 were especially susceptible to its ravages. But 1907 was the worst of several bad years for the Castillos. 4-year-old daughter Mariana died in April. Mother Zulema died in May at the age of 34, and 16-month-old Joseph died in August. Zulema had tuberculosis meningitis, a bacteria that penetrates the body's brain and spine, causing the body to waste away. The sick coughed up blood that contaminated the bacteria that was then spread through the air to those around them. Not only did Suleiman, Mariana, and Joseph all succumb to tuberculosis in 1907, daughter Vivian died at the age of 7 in July of 1913, and her father Nicholas, age 42, died a few months later, both from tuberculosis, same as Suleiman and the other children. At the time of his death, Nicholas was living with his mother in San Jose on Palm Street. But rather than choosing interment in a cemetery closer to the family home, his family had his body taken to Almaden, where he was laid to rest next to his wife and 4 of his 9 children. And then we have death by obesity. Now, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm not in the position to fat shame anyone. So I hope you will see this story as focused on the logistics involved in transporting a dead person, i.e., dead weight, to the cemetery. According to a story in San Francisco Call, May 26, 1902, it took 70 pallbearers to carry the casket holding the remains of Mrs. Hilaria Dorame, proprietress of the Spanish town tamale parlor. 70 pallbearers officiated at the funeral of Mrs. Hilaria de Dorame at New Almaden yesterday. The deceased was a very large woman weighing 410 pounds. There is no wagon road from the town to the Guadalupe Cemetery, and this small army of pallbearers was required to carry the coffin. The distance from the Dorame home to the cemetery is more than a mile, and 14 men were required to carry the great weight of the coffin and body. 5 times the pallbearers were changed during the funeral march, making a total of 70 coffin bearers. It was necessary to have the coffin made to order in San Francisco. Mrs. Dorame was the wife of Felipe Dorame and 73 years old when she died. So the story behind them is that for years Hilaria earned money washing and ironing clothes for the unmarried miners, and she saved enough money to start her tamale parlor. Felipe died the year after her at the age of 70, and he was still an employee at the mine after 45 years. The last thing I want to talk about is disrespect for the dead and their families, whether by nature or other people. Over the years, grave markers were stolen from the defunct cemeteries by presumed pranksters. The wooden marker for Roberto Berriesa that's in the cemetery now is actually a replica of the original, which was returned to the pioneers not many years ago by a contrite adult who admitted to stealing it and leaving it in his family basement many years back when he was a teenager. The old museum on Almaden Road in the 60s and 70s displayed antique rosaries that had been buried with their owners at the Guadalupe and Hacienda cemeteries. The creek running alongside the cemetery swelled and overflowed into the Hacienda cemetery during heavy rains. At those times, some claimed they saw bodies and pieces of caskets floating by in the creek. But the worst desecration for the Hacienda cemetery came in May 8, 1928, when the cemetery, which originally consisted of one large burying ground, had a road cut through the middle of it so that a neighbor who lived on the other side of the cemetery from where he had to park his car could drive up to his front door without having to walk by graves. Further, the cemetery fences were pulled down and monuments removed with the intent by the landowners to build housing over the place of rest. Later that May, after the road was paved across the cemetery, a widow, Maggie Moreno, traveled with her 7 children from Delmas Street in San Jose to visit her husband Arturo's grave in the Hacienda. Arturo had been injured in a mine accident in 1913 and shortly thereafter succumbed to typhoid fever. Decades later, Maggie's granddaughter could still remember her grandmother's anguish as she told of the visit to the cemetery only to find her husband's grave desecrated and his cement marker thrown aside. It was not only Arturo's grave but that was now under the road, but also that of Maggie's daughter, Lizzie, who was just shy of her 2nd birthday when she died in 1912. They also found the markers for Arturo's brother Joseph and 2 of his children lying in the scrap heap. Their graves too were gone. A dozen families sued the Almaden Lakefoot properties for damages. While they lost, the lawsuit proposed the housing was never built. The pioneers acquired ownership of the cemetery in 1974 when a generous donor bought it at a county sale where it was sold for unpaid taxes. While it's been a struggle over these last few years to maintain the property, the pioneers have been fortunate to have self-directed volunteers from the cemetery, neighbors, especially Eric Johns, who lives next door to the cemetery in the creekside, and particularly NAQCPA volunteers from the current board member Mike Boland and former board member Bruce Bartlett, who with many other helping hands have cleared a lot of brush these last few months and are starting to rebuild the picket fences surrounding the graves. The California pioneers of Santa Clara County owe many thanks to Eric's and all the many volunteers over the years who've helped us maintain the cemetery. Includes Boy Scouts too. We plan to further restore the cemetery over the next year, and we will have a rededication ceremony for the Hacienda Cemetery when we are done, to which you're all invited.
Thank you.
We have a miners bank donated by Mike Bolin. Jim Campbell drawing of the Hacienda furnace yard in the 1860s, and then Charles Cox donated all of these framed Carlton Watkins photographs, 5 different views of New Almaden. Okay, do I have I got all the tickets? Okay, so feel for the ones that have bent corners that my favorite people gave me. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so I'm just going to read the last 3 numbers, I think. Well, 4 numbers to be safe. So we have 8806. 8806. And are they going to just pick what they want, or are we going in some order?
Let's let it pick.
All right, you get to pick what you want. So do we have a ticket here? 288806. All right.
Next.
Next. Maybe that was my ticket.
Yeah, I don't
Nope. Okay. Go make sure. All right, next ticket. We have 8812. 8812. Thank you so much. You can pick whatever you'd like, your choice.
Okay, that one. Perfect.
All right, next ticket. 288794. 8794. Last 4 numbers. Yay. Have a winner. Okay.
Your choice.
All right. And now we have a ticket number 8832. 8832. All right. We have a winner. 8832.
made my day, young lady.
All right. 8840. 8840. Those, Terry. All right, Miners Bank. There might be some money in there. You never know. All right, we have 8800. 8800. Last 4 digits, 8800. Anybody? 8800. Terry says next. Moving right along. 8836. Congrats. Yay. 8828. 8828. Going once. 8828. Okay. 8782. 8782. 8782. Nope. 8782. 8782. 8798. Yay. All right. Thanks, Cheryl. 8790. 8790. 8790.